Tonight, reports of major gains for Russia on the Eastern Front with Ukraine. Moscow says it's all going to plan, while Kyiv disputes the claims. Yet pressure is mounting while Washington's envoy Steve Witkoff is in Moscow for talks on a pathway to peace. Moscow presses forward, so what comes next? Good evening. Russia says its forces have taken control of Pokrovsk after months of heavy fighting around the strategic junction linking key eastern and central routes. Well, the Defense Ministry has released new footage showing troops in the center of the city, while commanders also report success in Vovchansk following a briefing with President Putin. Now, Kyiv has pushed back on the claims but acknowledges intense pressure across the sector. A missile strike on Dnipro has added to the toll, even as US and Ukrainian officials held talks in Florida on the broader direction of the conflict. And with Washington's envoy Steve Witkoff expected in Moscow for further discussions, these battlefield developments form the backdrop to another critical round of diplomacy. Our report begins with the latest from Pokrovsk.
Russia's defense forces claim to have captured the Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk. The Defense Ministry released footage on Monday appearing to show Russian soldiers in the center of the frontline eastern Ukrainian town. This follows months of heavy fighting over the strategic hub. Long seen as a key city for Kyiv because of its road and rail links, Pokrovsk sits at a junction of major routes leading to Donetsk in the east and Dnipro and Zaporizhia in the west. It has also played a crucial role in battlefield operations, serving as a supply line that supported Ukrainian logistics before they branched out to smaller villages and frontline positions around the city. Russian military commanders also claim to have captured the town of Vovchansk after a meeting with President Vladimir Putin on Sunday.
This is an important direction. We all understand just how important. It will ensure solutions going forward to the tasks we initially set at the beginning of the special military operation.
Ukraine, however, has not acknowledged that either location has fallen into Russian hands, though it has reported around 43 Russian attacks in the sector around Pokrovsk. Meanwhile, a Russian ballistic missile strike on Dnipro on Monday killed at least 4 people and injured dozens. These developments come after high-level talks in Florida on Sunday between US and Ukrainian officials on how to end the war. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, is expected to meet Putin in Moscow on Tuesday to discuss the Trump administration's latest proposal to end the conflict. On Monday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was in Paris meeting with President Emmanuel Macron. The French president said the European Union will find a way to use frozen Russian assets to support Kyiv.
For the latest from Moscow, let's cross over to A News' Dasha Chernesova for more now.
Well, Guy, the talks in Moscow between Russian President Vladimir Putin and US envoy Steve Witkoff will focus on the US drafted peace proposal. This is the 6th time that Witkoff has traveled to Russia since the start of the year. But for this visit, Witkoff will be alongside President Trump's son-in-law and former special advisor Jared Kushner. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that Putin and Witkoff will discuss the understandings reached by Washington and Kyiv and stressed that Russia is open to peace negotiations but must achieve its goals set within the framework of what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine. Peskov added that Russia highly values the efforts of the Trump administration in resolving the Ukrainian conflict and wants to end the conflict for many generations to come. Among the key sticking points in the Ukrainian settlements are territorial issues, the status of Russian-speaking minorities in Ukraine, as well as the international recognition of any arrangement between Moscow and Kyiv. And Russian officials have repeatedly ruled out Ukraine's possible NATO membership. Ahead of this renewed U.S. diplomatic push to broker an end to the conflict, Putin visited the front lines, and Russian MOD has reported that its forces have taken control over the strategic hub of Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region, as well as Volchansk in the Kharkiv region, and claimed progress on other directions. Following Russia's successes on the ground, President Putin claimed Ukraine is incapable of reacting to Russia's military actions.
Well, joining me now to discuss this further is the geopolitical analyst Alex Reportify, joining us from Chongqing in China. Alex, very good to see you on Primetime. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's look at this then. Moscow's claims about taking Pokrovsk. How are those claims being viewed in Kyiv, by the EU, and also particularly by President Zelensky, who's on this visit, isn't he, to Ireland at the moment?
Well, I think it's a reality check and a wake-up call. I mean, let's be real here. The gateway to Donetsk has been kicked wide open. And if you listen to Kiev, you think it's just a kind of like a minor traffic jam. But while the Ukrainian front line is actively crumbling, what I can't believe is Zelensky is enjoying photo ops, warm handshakes in comfortable Dublin. It's like a split screen of reality. I mean, it's devastating losses here. We are talking devastating losses on the ground versus his PR tour in the West. I mean, the denial is standard for the operating procedure here, but, as we say, the map doesn't lie.
And very, Ukraine does dispute this sense of loss of control. But it's most military analysts, I think, now are looking at this, saying, as you put it, that the gateway to the rest of the region now is a much easier job than actually the job that's been reportedly achieved in recent days. What reasons then is Kyiv giving for this? How is it justifying its position?
Again, an act of desperation. I mean, Kiev's definition of control is it's getting more creative as we see this conflict go on. Apparently, if you're one guy with a radio left in a basement, the city really hasn't fallen. I mean, that's how much of a comedy response it is in a very, very delicate and painful situation for many families that have lost soldiers in it. It's a desperate spin. Brussels, their solution is to throw a stack of euros into the furnace. I mean, when does it end? It's adorable that they think wiring cash to a collapsing administration is going to stop Russian glide bombs. You can print money, but you can't print a new army.
Yeah, that's right. The EU, the EU's position is interesting, isn't it? As this conflict's developed, it's now talking about the use of frozen Russian assets. How do we interpret what the EU's been saying in the last few days, and what are we expecting to come over the next week or so, do you think?
Well, just because those elected and some non-elective bureaucrats are sitting there making decisions doesn't make them intelligent. In fact, if they want to torpedo their economy, you take 1 ruble or 1 euro from the frozen assets out of Euroclear, and it is game over. Nobody will ever trust, those countries ever again, especially not Brussels. The bankers are stepping in. The Belgians realize that if you start stealing, sovereign assets, the credibility is dust. I mean, there's nothing left. I mean, the hawks are screaming for cash because they know that the American credit cards basically declined. The Trump administration says, no problem giving you warheads, no problem sending tanks. You got to send us cash for that. It's not free anymore. But make no mistake, if the Euro banks want to divert away from the banking laws to fund this losing war, the financial blowback will do more damage to the EU than Putin ever could. That is for certain.
And Alex, what is President Putin's strategy at this point? Is it to continue to make this a protracted process so that the bombing can go on for as long as possible, and therefore weaken Ukraine so that it has to agree to favourable terms? What's the sort of military strategy, do you think, in the mind of President Putin at this point?
Well, I see it this way. The Trump administration has gone down this road before with Zelensky and his government. And each time the EU has stepped in, put in lots of hardware, military hardware, whether it's, game-changing tanks, game-changing airplanes, game-changing missiles. It never really results in any credible reach for the Ukraine government and its army. So Putin realizes this, and he understands that he can systematically go there. He's got the upper hand now, for sure. Even all of the NATO nations cannot keep up to the military might of the Russian government and military. So, this is really the only meeting that actually matters. Witkoff, he's not there for sightseeing, like Zelensky is in Dublin. He's there to close, let's call it like a real estate deal. And let's call it peace. We're seeing Zelensky on his dog and pony shows through Ireland. And I really think now is the time where the Americans and the Russians are actually deciding the borders here and saying, okay, this is how it's going to be carved up. Kiev is terrified of this because they know basically the American blank check is dead. It's dead. And, well, the landlord here has arrived and they're going to negotiate the lease. The terms aren't going to be pretty for the Zelensky government. It's going to be a hard pill to swallow. Territory is going to have to be given up. And if he doesn't watch it, and if Zelensky's not careful, they may get to Kiev by Christmas time.
And what do you suppose is going to happen when Mr. Witkoff gets into that room with President Putin, and as you put it, sort of negotiates this real estate deal called peace? What is Mr. Putin's strategy likely to be? How do you think that's going to play out? Is he going to want to make sure that these talks continue for a bit longer so that he can keep up with the bombing and the military campaign, or is he going to be inclined to want to do a deal right now?
We have to look at this. We always hear this term, we need money for rebuilding. I think Russia is going to put a considerable amount of money on rebuilding, but what it's going to rebuild is what it has actually captured over the last 3 years here. As the front lines move forward, that's Russia moving forward, progressing, getting the land that it feels these people and, the entire, I would call it the strategy from day one, where we've had these elections in these regions where they wanted some sort of sovereignty or autonomy. The lines are drawn. They're in the law books and the legal law books in Russia. Those territories belong to Russia now. And Russia understands that, okay, if we've captured a city and we've blown out the lights and the infrastructure and we've captured it, we're going to have to pay for it. I mean, they're not asking the Europeans and the Americans to pay for that territory. So outside of that territory, Zelensky might think, well, hey, we got 140 some billion in Euroclear. Maybe let's, make Kiev the Monaco of Eastern Europe. It's not going to happen. So I think we're getting down to territory where we're going to see these territories ceded, at least admitted from the Ukraine side, which Russia said all along they're part of Russia. We're going to see that territory happen with a demilitarized zone, a promise for rebuilding. Of course, Russia's going to rebuild its territory, and probably some money set aside to helping Ukraine at least get its infrastructure when it comes to electricity and stuff that's Russia's been hitting over the last few months back in order. That's where I think it's going to probably end up. And I think it's going to be rather very soon rather than later.
And Alex, I just want to end by asking you about the EU. We've heard they have complained in different forms, in different ways, about being excluded from the talks, from this process. We've now got President Zelensky in Ireland. We've got Monsieur Macron reaffirming EU backing. What is Europe's position at this point when it comes to this conflict?
You know, you've heard it on this program a few times. I've always said the guilty always scream the loudest. They know they're in the corner. They're screaming from the cheap seats while the game is being played on the field. You know, Macron, he's a man of sound bits, unwavering support, the coalition of the willing. I mean, they make for nice sound bits, but, you know, it's completely irrelevant to the military reality that the Europeans are facing here. Moscow is looking at the scoreboard. They have the land, they have the momentum, and now the ear of the White House. Europe is posturing for a world that ceased to exist about 6 months ago. It's going to be a pretty abrupt ending here, and Europe's going to say, wait a minute, we have to go back to all the people in our countries and say, gee, we spent a lot of your children's money in the future on a war that we knew we couldn't win from day one, but hey, we gave it a shot. We tried, right? Get ready. The Zelensky curse is going to have shockwaves through Europe. We are going to see leaders of those countries that supported this, supported it financially, or through proxy, be replaced as leaders of these countries over the next 24 months. It's going to happen.
Alex, your lucid analysis never disappoints. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Much appreciated.
Great. Thanks again.
Okay, let's now take a look at this from another angle, as my next guest is retired Lieutenant General Marco Serona. He's joining us from Lisbon in Portugal. General, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I want to start by asking you, how do the latest Russian advances change the wider military picture, do you think, from your professional perspective?
Okay, good evening. Thank you very much for having me today. Let's see, from my point of view, the things they are happening in the ground are really difficult for Ukraine, of course, but we cannot foresee a military collapse of Ukraine in the next days or weeks or months. So sometimes we have the illusion created by Russia, especially, that the things in the ground are going to run to a collapse in the next days. That is not true. The situation in the ground is difficult for Ukrainians, but not in Donbass, yes, but especially in Zaporizhia. But nevertheless, the things are not in a way that are going to create a collapse in the defense lines of the Ukrainians. So the situation in the ground is very much far away from what is being put in the international media by the Russians. We can see that also inside, because the Russian military bloggers have been shut down by the Kremlin, because they were saying bad words to the Russian armed forces about this. So what is in the media, it's not the reality in the ground from the Russian, said by the Russian military bloggers. So in my point of view, of course, the situation is difficult for Ukraine, but it's not a collapse. It's not in the screens for the next weeks, months ahead.
It's very interesting indeed. And General, we can discuss the nuances of the strategy, of course, but in terms of the tempo, do you think that these latest moves by Russia give us a sense of them ramping up, of sort of increasing the tempo, any sense of sort of this being a final push, if you like, to secure that region that they see as so important?
Yes, I suppose so. So it's for the Russians, it's very, very much difficult to increase the tempo they're getting in the world. So almost all of the resources that they have in the last 3 to 4 months, they deploy more or less more 300,000 people, militaries to the ground. But the situation has not changed so in a way that the Russians, especially the Kremlin, wants. So that's the point. So for increasing the tempo in the ground, they need much more resources than they put that there are there. So that's the main problem. In the other side, the Ukrainians with their strategic moves, especially in bombing strategic infrastructure in Russia and logistic infrastructures, So they are also difficult in the logistics of the Russians, because the Russians put a lot of people on the ground, but now they are in very much some difficulties to provide logistic support to the people that are combating and fighting in several places, especially in the Donbass. So let's see. You can put it in this way: increase the tempo in the military operations in the ground to get all the Donbass in the next 3 to 4 months. It's impossible. So it's because you can see what they are progressing in the ground. They are progressing several, this year more or less 1,000 square kilometers. So for 1 year, they need to get more than the 4 or 5 times that. If they keep this military tempo, they will have to fight for more, let's see, 3 or 4 weeks.
And is there any sense that just by continuing these talks, for allowing the talks to just go on in a protracted manner, that actually that allows Russia to continue with the bombing, to weaken the logistical capabilities and the morale of people in Ukraine, so that potentially President Putin thinks he'll get a better deal when eventually he has to sign on the dotted line?
I don't think so. Let's see. The morale of the Ukrainians, it's strong, because they are. Let's see. We can try to erode the morale. That's what Russia is doing with the strikes to civilian infrastructures and the cities and so on. But I think that is not going to conduct a moral collapse of the Ukrainian population. It's easier to get into. We have some signs of that, to get some moral collapse of the Russians that are fighting in the front line, because we have thousands of desertions every week. So it's something that we can get also from the military bloggers, Russian military bloggers, people that are running away from the front lines. So let's see. If Russia is trying to do the things for creating conditions for a moral collapse of the Ukrainians, that will be difficult for them. Okay. So, and I suppose that Russia is also, Russia, when I say Russia, it's Putin and the Kremlin. And they are trying to have a solution, of course, for the military conflict, because everybody knows, and the Russians knows that also, that it's not easy for Russia to keep this military engagement and all the money that is cost, that the military operation costs for a long time. The Russians say that they can fight more 5 or 6 or 6 or 20 years. We know that is not possible. And then I suppose that even this proposal of a peace agreement or a ceasefire at this stage is also something that Putin is pushing through the Americans to get it at the end of the year, because the Russian knows that their economy is not good. The military strikes that Ukrainians are doing to the oil infrastructure are decreasing the capability of the Russians to have money from that oil. And if they start attacking the shadow fleet, this would be a disaster for the flow of the oil and the gasoline and so on, for the exportations of the Russians, and no income will create a lot of difficulties for the Russian economy in 2026.
And you mentioned the Americans there. I just want to ask you about Mr. Witkoff's repeated trips to Moscow. What does that signal to you? What should we read into that about how the US is approaching the military realities on the ground?
Let's see. This is my point. I suppose that Donald Trump has changed his motto, because we remember that before inauguration you talk a lot, and after inauguration, peace through strength. So it seems now that they changed to peace through business, and peace through business. It's what we are looking in these kind of conversations. Of course, we know that for Donald Trump and for Putin, in the top of all of this is not only Ukraine, is the possibility of big business between the countries, between companies, between friends, and so on. So it's something that is important for the America to have peace, because peace is good for the business, for that, in that line, Donald Trump is pushing, has pushed the Ukrainians to capitulate. That will not be possible, because at the end of the day, it will be the Ukrainians that have to sign for that. Otherwise, it will not be possible to have peace, of course. If the Ukrainians don't get a minimal, I said a minimal, just peace, they will not accept, and the Europeans are going to support them, of course. So it's impossible for the Americans and the Russians create the conditions for a peace agreement that is not in line with the minimal expectations of Ukraine. They don't have leverage for that. The Russia have not leverage in the military front, because if they would have leverage, they already have solved the problem, the military problem. They will not be able to do it. And the United States are trying to solve things in a way that, okay, they take it for granted that the Europeans are going to pay those kinds of things. The Europeans have to be involved in the negotiations, in the agreements. Otherwise, it will not be possible. So it's something that supposed blocked, and the Europeans and the Ukrainian point of view have to be taken on board, of course.
I just want to finally ask you, as a very senior ex-military leader, like many other people of your rank, you understand what happens at that interface between diplomacy and military strategy. When we look at this delegation, it's not just Mr. Witkoff. You've got people like Jared Kushner who are joining this visit. It's a broad delegation. How do you see the dynamics of this interaction? Do you think this is a wise strategy, or do you think there are other things at play here?
Let's see. Sometimes it's difficult to see what is behind this mood of diplomacy, because let's see. We know that Donald Trump, at least in my view, they think they have more leverage, more power than they really has. So it's that is the main point for the problems with these negotiations. He tried a modality like this in the Middle East, but the situation in the Middle East is different, of course. We cannot compare Hamas with Ukraine, the country with armed forces supported by other nations. So it's not possible, and for this we need diplomacy. And more than that, diplomacy should be run by professional people that know how the diplomacy works. So the way of making proposals for both parties see something, of course, and that is not the way. The United States, even that for me it's difficult to see the United States as a mediator. Everybody knows from this point in time, till the leaks of the phone call between Witkoff and Ushmarov, it's not possible that Witkoff could be a mediator. It's something that in a normal country, so to speak, you would be dismissed immediately if he was a diplomat from France or from the United Kingdom or from Portugal. You would be dismissed the day after the leak, of course. So it's the United States are not a mediator. So if even trying to create a dialogue, those kind of people, even and Kushner, are not professional diplomats. So put aside the professional diplomats. It's in my view, it's a mistake for the United States that they will pay. They will have a payback in the near future for sure.
Well, General Serrano, we appreciate your expert insights very much indeed, and we thank you for joining us from Lisbon. Thank you. Okay, after the break, Georgia moves to challenge the BBC over explosive claims made during last year's protests. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time. Now, the Georgian government and the BBC are locked in a high-stakes confrontation after a BBC investigation alleged the use of a World War I-era chemical agent during last year's protests. Well, Georgian Dream denies the claims and says it will take the broadcaster to international court. Our Nini Nikolashvili has more.
Georgia's ruling party, Georgian Dream, says it will pursue legal action against the BBC, accusing the broadcaster of making baseless allegations about the authorities' response to last year's anti-government protests. The dispute centers on a BBC investigation suggesting that a chemical agent known as Kamit, originally developed during World War I, may have been used against demonstrators. Protesters reported symptoms such as burning eyes, severe coughing and vomiting, with some effects reportedly lasting for weeks. The BBC says its reporting is based on interviews with chemical weapons experts, medical professionals and members of Georgia's special forces. Georgian Dreams rejects the findings, calling the investigation politically motivated and claiming that the BBC ignored detailed information provided by the government before publication. Former Interior Minister Vakhtang Gomalauri confirmed that substances referenced in BBC report had been purchased and used by the Interior Ministry, but only until 2012. He said they have not been acquired or deployed since then, though they were also not formally investigated or destroyed. Opposition groups are calling for an international inquiry, saying an internal investigation would lack credibility. International officials have begun to react as well. A spokesperson for the European Commission said that if the allegations prove credible, they would be unacceptable and urged a prompt, transparent investigation. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Well, joining me now in the studio is the host of Inside Politics and Frontlines, Anastasia Lavrina. Thank you for being in the studio once again. It's always great to have you. Well, what an interesting time the BBC's having at the moment, Anastasia. The President of the United States, the governing party of Georgia, both pursuing legal action. We know that Azerbaijan has had challenges with the BBC, demanded answers to questions that it hasn't yet received. We could go into all of that shortly, but let's just look at Georgia now. What does this say, do you think, about the current climate in Georgia?
Well, indeed, you partially answered the questions, and I was about to start the challenges BBC is facing at now, starting with 2020 when President Aliyev in his answer actually challenged BBC journalists with his response. And I do remember when I asked one Chinese journalist about this, he told me that response of Azerbaijani president became a video as a virus video in China. Everybody welcomed how President Ilham Aliyev challenged the journalist of BBC. And this time is Georgia also planning to bring this case before the court to have more detailed investigations. I already read the response of BBC, who actually putting under the question the position of Georgian government. And I tried to find the similar cases in the internet. Probably there were some more similarities in between. And actually this is the first time when the ruling party is putting under the question the investigations and bringing asking for more investigation to be done. Previously, it was more about the members of parliament, let's say, or some, policymakers or companies, let's say, especially in Russia, who challenge the world global media. But this time, the ruling party are bringing this case before the court. So it's highly, I would say, significant step that shows that Georgian government views the BBC report as more than a journalistic dispute. It's much more as a direct challenge to state credibility, because the reputation of the ruling party might be, increased from the positive perspective in case of the positive outcomes of this investigation. It's also a notable step because Georgian Dream frames it as a measured legal response rather than an act of political pressure in this situation. Also, the move demonstrates that Georgia is no longer willing to accept the one-sided interpretations from major Western media and willing to show its own independent policy. Also, bringing more cases to I will say, prove what happened a year before in Georgia. I mean, all of those protests. And it also reflects the belief that with the government that external narratives about Georgia must be challenged in case of successful outcome of this investigation by the Georgian side, I would say.
Now, there have been question marks recently, as we've said, about bias and question marks about balance at the BBC. Obviously, the case brought by President Trump led to the two most senior people at the BBC losing their jobs. Here at A News, we're passionately committed to giving both sides of an argument. So with that in mind, from the BBC's perspective, what is it that they're alleging and what evidence is there to support their claims?
So the BBC alleged that authority used a World War I era chemical agent against protesters in 2024. They refer to the words of one doctor who participated in those protests and also who were explaining the position of some patients he had after those protesters in Georgia, saying that all of those symptoms they had, it's exactly what the patients could have after using that chemical agent. Also, they refer to the militants, to those who served in the army, I mean in the Ministry of Defense prior the latest events in Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, 2019 or 2020. And now this gentleman who is giving the interview, he's no longer living in Georgia, he moved to Ukraine. And referring to his past experience, he is trying to accuse the Georgian authorities by using this chemical agent. So the BBC also saying about some let's say militants who are still serving in the army without mentioning the names, who can prove the facts as the Georgian authorities use the chemical agents, but still without any concrete provements except of these words and some symptoms the people who participated in the demonstration had. And Georgian Dream, of course, considers this a serious claim that undermines public trust in law enforcement, let's say emergency service, and the work of the government institutions. For the Georgian Dream Party, it's very important to bring the facts, let's say, to prove that there was no any similar case used in the last year, which BBC is referring to. So from the government standpoint, the report relied on testimonies they view as politically motivated more, especially taking into account the fact that there is no similar demonstration taking place in Georgia at the moment. And we do remember that during those protests, how many international media, especially Western media, including BBC, blamed Georgian government, Georgian Dream Party, for not allowing the protesters to have these peaceful demonstrations. But we do remember that not all of them were quite peaceful, and the Georgian Dream Party was blamed for the fact that it's no longer willing to continue negotiations with the European Union for the future enlargement and Georgian membership within this alliance. If I'm not mistaken, there were some political statements also made that Georgia is not willing to stop the process completely, but they will take some more time for making these negotiations with the European Union authorities more mutually respected. Therefore, there were some political sensitivity, and now Georgian Dream Party also blaming BBC for this political incorrectness and willingness to bring more political sensitivity to the future processes taking place there. So therefore, in Georgia, the political parties see it as a lawsuit and a way to also defend the integrity and professionalism of the governmental institutions in case of their successful outcomes with improvements.
Anastasia, let's just talk about that lawsuit now. How strong do you think the government's legal position is now? And what sort of evidence are they going to be bringing forth to try to convince the international court?
Well, the position will depend on whether they can demonstrate that the BBC acted with insufficient factual verification. If there is a real provement of that, then the reputation of BBC, especially with those scandals around Trump's and BBC accusations, will definitely affect the position of BBC for the future and the reliance of this media source. But in order to build a credible case and provements, the government will need, I guess, I want to bring here three main points. So first of all, they have to prove and provide the scientific analysis showing the alleged agent was not present. The second, it's official documentation, also proving that submitted detailed responses sorry for that. Official documentation which will definitely affect the position of the government itself in this case, and documentation proving that no any chemical agent was used during the demonstrations in 2024, with an official statements made by the people who are involved in this procedure, and also the expert testimony in order to challenge the technical and methodological basis of the investigation here. So while the legal process is going, well, it's at the high visibility, and together with the government's arguments, it's the only case when Georgian Dream Party will defend objective accuracy and proving that BBC had only political interest in this material they had.
I should say there have been many people who have jumped to the BBC's defence, perfectly credible voices across the world. Those that have been critical of the BBC, particularly recently, talk about a characterisation of good guys and bad guys, an overly simplistic way of dividing up the world. And of course, we know that geopolitics is much more nuanced than that. When you look at the image, the perception of Georgia as this plays out, how do you expect this case to impact that?
We should expect more criticism from the European states, and there will definitely be some statements by Georgian opposition, which was quite strong during the process in 2024. So that the public actually was divided that time, and probably we will see some more division this time as well. Those who are willing to have more European Union integration, they will definitely blame the government for situation happened in 2024. We should expect more information to be published in the official media sources, especially those who have pro-European position. And at the same time, those who are willing to have more stable situation and who fully support the policy course selected by the Georgian Dream Party, they will try to defend the position of the government, blaming the Western media for an attempt to destabilize the situation. Therefore, we should expect the division, but it's very interesting to see how the investigation will be gone in the future. Let's say BBC provided the statements made by some former officials or militants who were involved, how it was presented to to the officials and to the public audience. Let's see whom Georgia can bring from its own side. I mean, the scientists, the professor, or the militants who will investigate this course. So here we can expect two lines of the process. The first, the position of BBC, because Georgian Dream Party will definitely have to bring this case before the court in order to get any kind of compensations or, let's say, excuses from the BBC side in case of any, let's say, improvement of its inability to provide the right information. And the second issue, Georgian Dream Party now has to prove that they didn't use this chemical agent, and that all of this action which was done by the Georgian Dream Party during the process was in accordance with the Georgian law and without any violations of the human rights. The countries who have more neutral position over Georgian stance around the European Union course, they will have more balanced approach, I do expect, supporting the government and also probably blaming some Western media sources. And those who have more pro-European course, they will try to use this as an opportunity to probably bring some more discussion around the future of Georgia, whether it will have, as it was mentioned before, more pro-Russian, pro-European policy or more independent. But as I mentioned before, for Georgia, if in the case of successful result, it's a very good chance to show that Georgia is willing to have a fair approach from Western partners, from Western media, and will definitely support and sustain and defend its interest in the future, whether it relates to the media, any kind of mistakes, or whether it will refer to the future negotiation process with European Union institutions.
It's very interesting, this whole dynamic of governments sort of fighting back when they feel that unfair or untrue or misleading claims have been made. Of course, nobody wants an international news media that is afraid, where there is evidence, to confront governments, to ask difficult questions. Yep. But if the Georgian ruling party does win this case, if they do manage to convince the international court, what sort of precedent do you think that could set?
It could reinforce the idea that governments, including the small states, the smaller states, have the right to challenge international media. And probably you also mentioned this before, that the small states are gaining a lot of attention at the moment, whether it's in any kind of fighting with the media sources or any kind of global affairs. So Georgia can prove that yes, the small state has its own voice and will defend it till the end if needed. Then it also may encourage the global media outlets to apply more stricter, let's say, verification when covering political sensitive events. So better investigation, probably reference to the right and proper resources rather than mentioning everything without investigation. And there were some cases when the Western media also prepared the reports, let's say even about Azerbaijan, without the proper investigation, without having someone in the regions. And then we do remember about this policy of double standards Azerbaijan was fighting with, especially during the conflict with neighboring Armenia. Of course, it will also raise some concerns that governments may use legal tools to contest investigative journalism and somehow intervene the work of the journalists in different parts of the world. But again, for Georgia, such a ruling will definitely be interpreted as a victory for institutional credibility and national reputation.
Very interesting story. I'm sure that you will help us to follow it as it develops. As always, Anastasia, lovely to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories shaping the week with Katie Wilson. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Now with all the latest business news, Katie Wilson is with us. Katie, what's on the agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, Keir Starmer is defending UK-China ties, AI fears are pushing young Brits into learning a trade, and Samsung is flipping the script on smartphones, literally. Let's get started. We begin in the UK, where Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is defending his move to step up engagement with China. He says the UK needs to back British businesses by chasing big export wins, but stay clear-eyed on security. His message: engage where it works, protect where it matters. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
For years, the narrative ran that China was the coming power. Well, now it has arrived, and the UK needs a China policy that recognises this reality. But instead, for years, we've blown hot and cold. We had the golden age of relations under David Cameron and George Osborne, which then flipped to the ice age that some still advocate. The result is that, whilst our allies have developed a more sophisticated approach, the UK has become an outlier. The Chancellor and the Trade Secretary visited China this year. The Investment Minister is there right now. And this re-engagement is already delivering billions in export wins and market access for British businesses. So in areas like financial and professional services, creative industries, pharmaceuticals, luxury goods and more, great British success stories, the export opportunities are huge, and we will back you to seize them.
Staying in the UK, and more young people are rethinking what future-proof work looks like. As AI reshapes the job market, that means ditching the white-collar track for plumbing. This is part of a growing shift towards skilled trades, as worries about automation push students towards careers that robots still can't touch.
In a labour market where artificial intelligence is quickly transforming and sometimes replacing jobs, student Marina Yaroshenko wanted to find a future-proof career. Like a growing number of young people in Britain and beyond, the 18-year-old, who is originally from Ukraine, has opted for a skilled trade and is training to become a plumber.
So the reason why I chose the engineering environment and construction in general, because that made me realise when I was choosing my career path, that's something that AI won't take over.
White-collar jobs are viewed as more vulnerable to disruption by AI and automation than manual labour. Experts say it will be a while before robotics can do the intricate work involved in trades like plumbing. According to one survey, 1 in 6 employers in Britain expects the use of AI tools to allow them to reduce their headcount in the next 12 months. The City of Westminster College, or CWC in London, said it has seen enrolments in its engineering, construction and built environment courses rise by nearly 10% over the past 3 years. CEO Stephen Davis credits the rise partly to the growth of AI and also to the student worries about the cost of university.
I think AI has played a significant role in getting people to think more strategically about actually where can I establish in a career with longevity. Sometimes plumbers have to put their hands down the toilet to unblock it. As vulgar as that may sound, but that comes with the reality of the job. And I've yet to meet a robot who does that for us.
A survey carried out earlier this year by the Trades Union Congress found that half of UK adults were worried about AI's impact on their jobs. Those aged 25 to 35 were said to be particularly concerned. Yaroshenko said another reason she sees herself staying in a skilled trade in the long term is that the current workforce is ageing, and demand for a new generation of skilled workers will stay high. Undergraduate enrolments at UK universities have slightly declined, falling over 1% in 2023 to 2024 from the previous academic year. That's thought to be the first annual decrease in nearly a decade.
And it's not just workers rethinking the future, companies are too. Stellantis is bracing for an 11% production drop at its French factories over the next 3 years. As the carmaker tries to rein in overcapacity, output could fall at most plants, with the forecast hinging partly on upcoming EU decisions on CO2 targets.
Production at Stellantis' French factories is set to drop by 11% over the next 3 years. That's according to company estimates cited by trade unions. It's part of measures by the world's fourth largest car maker to tackle overcapacity. Trade union sources told Reuters that output at the company's 5 assembly factories in France is forecast to fall to 587,800 units by 2028. The sources added that production is expected to decrease at 3 out of 5 factories, although they said the forecast may shift depending on EU decisions due on December the 10th that are expected to add flexibility to meeting CO2 targets in the bloc. Stellantis declined to comment. Earlier this year, the carmaker temporarily stopped production at 2 plants due to weak demand in Europe. Data released earlier on Monday showed that Stellantis vehicle registrations in France fell by 5.5% in November. That brings its market share to just over a quarter, down slightly from the same month last year.
And the broader manufacturing picture isn't much brighter. Factories across Europe and Asia are losing momentum, with weak demand and tariff uncertainty dragging on output. The Eurozone, China and Japan all slipped deeper into contraction, though Britain and parts of Southeast Asia bucked the trend with pockets of growth.
Manufacturing was weak in Europe and Asia's biggest economies in November. That's according to key business surveys released Monday. Analysts blamed lower domestic demand and tariff uncertainties. The closely watched Purchasing Managers' Index, or PMI, showed manufacturing activity contracted in the Eurozone, China and Japan last month. But there were bright spots for Britain and some economies in Southeast Asia which saw growth. Eurozone manufacturing activity slipped back into contraction. Germany's dominant manufacturing sector saw a clear fall in business conditions and new orders dropped at the fastest rate in 10 months. Meanwhile, French manufacturing contracted further in November as a drop in production and slower demand for goods hit the sector. While Britain had its first rise in activity since September last year, it saw improved domestic demand and less of a slowdown in orders from overseas. A PMI showed factory activity slipped back into a slight contraction in China. The number was released a day after Beijing's official measure showed activity falling for the 8th consecutive month. Asia's other manufacturing powerhouses also struggled with sluggish demand in November. Progress in US trade negotiations didn't lead to a significant recovery in orders for the region. Japan's PMI showed new orders continued to decline, stretching the downturn to 2.5 years, while South Korea's factory activity also contracted for a second month in November.
Over to the entertainment industry now, and Warner Brothers Discovery may be inching closer to a deal, with a second round of bids now in. Bankers spent the weekend sharpening proposals from Netflix, Paramount, Skydance and Comcast, and the binding bids mean the board could move fast if the numbers line up.
Warner Brothers Discovery has received a second round of bids, including a mostly cash offer from Netflix. That was according to a Reuters source on Monday. The auction reportedly could conclude in the coming days or weeks. The source further said that bankers for Paramount, Skydance, Comcast, and Netflix worked over the weekend on improved offers for all or part of Warner Brothers. The bids are binding, giving the broad scope to approve a deal quickly if terms are met. Neither party would comment on the news. Last week, Warner Brothers asked bidders to submit improved offers by December 1 after receiving preliminary buyout bids from Paramount, Skydance, Comcast, and Netflix. The board previously rejected Paramount's nearly $24 a share offer for the company, which valued it at $60 billion. Warner Brothers, which is home to the Harry Potter and DC Comics film franchises, plans to split its studio and cable units next year to separate its streaming business from its lagging cable networks.
And finally, who remembers making calls on a flip phone? Well, Samsung is taking that nostalgia into the 21st century with its new Galaxy Z Trifold, a 3-panel foldable smartphone with a massive 10-inch display. It'll set you back almost $2,500 and it hits South Korea later this month.
Samsung Electronics on Tuesday unveiled its first multi-folding smartphone to bolster its position in an increasingly competitive segment of the market. The Galaxy Z Trifold unfurls into a 10-inch display using 3 panels, about 25% larger than Samsung's latest Galaxy Z Fold 7. The model could be yours for a whopping $2,440. Samsung Electronics Executive Vice President Alex Lim says the trifold is like a special edition intended for customers who specifically want it.
I believe the foldable market will continue to grow. Recently, Fold 7 has been receiving a lot of love, and we have learned a lot from that. The trifold in particular could act as a catalyst that drives more explosive growth in key parts of the segment.
The trifold will go on sale in South Korea on December 12 and will be rolled out in China, Singapore, Taiwan, and the United Arab Emirates within this year. The US launch is expected as early as the first quarter of next year. Competition in the foldable smartphone market is set to heat up, with China's Huawei launching the first three-way folding phone last September. Meanwhile, Apple is expected to release its first foldable next year. However, such handsets remain a niche product for now. Analysts at Counterpoint Research predict they will account for less than 2% of the total smartphone market this year and will remain below 3% by 2027.
Well, there we have it. That's your business news roundup for the day. Back to you, Guy. Did you have a flip phone?
I didn't have a flip phone, but I had one from the days of before flip phones. I think it was the Nokia, and I remember vividly playing the game Snake on it, where the snake would go around in the olden days. I also had one at university that was so old that I can't even remember the make, but the aerial used to kind of get pulled out from the top, and it weighed about as much as a brick. What about you? Did you have a flip phone?
Well, I did have a flip phone. It was pink and had Winnie the Pooh charms on it. And apparently they get called vintage now, which even makes me feel old.
A vintage Winnie the Pooh phone. I bet it's worth quite a bit now if you could find it. Thank you very much, Katie. After the break, Washington defends a US admiral involved in recent Caribbean operations as military activity intensifies near Venezuela and Colombia. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You are watching Prime Time. Now, Washington is backing the US Admiral at the center of recent deadly operations in the Caribbean. Officials insist that Frank Bradley acted lawfully when he approved strikes on what the Pentagon calls a Venezuelan drug vessel. Now, the move comes as the United States expands its military presence in waters off Venezuela and Colombia. Here's more.
The White House says US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth approved a Navy admiral's decision to strike a Venezuelan boat that was believed to be carrying illegal drugs. Hegseth praised the admiral and called him an American hero. White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt said the admiral also ordered a second strike and that he had the legal right to do so.
President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated.
Since September, the US military has carried out at least 19 strikes on alleged drug smuggling boats in the Caribbean and Pacific, killing more than 80 people. President Donald Trump met with his national security team on Monday to discuss military options and other ways to increase pressure.
According to reports here in Washington, during a recent call with President Trump, Maduro offered to leave Venezuela, but only under the condition that he and his family receive total amnesty from any prosecution in the future, and for that all sanctions to be immediately removed. President Trump dismissed Maduro's counteroffer, and the possibility for a direct clash has now intensified even more. The Trump administration has said that it does not recognize Maduro as the legitimate president in Venezuela.
It's unclear if he can still make a fresh proposal involving safe passage. Maduro's administration has requested another call with Trump, according to 3 sources. Maduro denies any involvement in the accusations of alleged drug trafficking and on Monday swore absolute loyalty to the Venezuelan people. During recent weeks, the US has moved an aircraft carrier task force and thousands of troops into the Caribbean, raising concerns it may be preparing for military action. On Saturday, President Trump declared Venezuela's airspace closed to all airlines. Critics from both parties want to examine the legality of the strikes, while the Trump administration says they are acts of self-defense to stop illicit drugs entering the United States.
Well, the pressure on Caracas has now reached a new level. President Trump has delivered a direct ultimatum to Nicolas Maduro, warning of severe consequences if he refuses to leave the country. Well, let's go back to our correspondent in Washington, Ube Shah-Banda, now for more on what the White House is signaling and how quickly this situation could escalate.
President Donald Trump has reportedly given Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro an ultimatum to either evacuate from Venezuela with his family or else face severe repercussions. According to reports here in Washington, during a recent call with President Trump, Maduro offered to leave Venezuela, but only under the condition that he and his family receive total amnesty from any prosecution in the future, and for that all sanctions to be immediately removed. President Trump dismissed Maduro's counteroffer, and the possibility for a direct clash has now intensified even more. The Trump administration has said that it does not recognize Maduro as the legitimate president in Venezuela. President Trump met with his national security advisors in the Oval Office in the White House on Monday to discuss potential military options and other forms of pressure for Venezuela. A U.S. aircraft carrier strike force and thousands of U.S. soldiers and Marines have been positioned in the Caribbean in recent weeks, ready to launch a direct attack if so ordered by the American commander-in-chief. The White House has designated a drug cartel believed to be directly linked to Maduro as a foreign terror organization. It's a move widely believed to set the stage for the possible forcible removal of Maduro from power. Multiple boats smuggling drugs off the Venezuelan coast have recently been targeted by the Pentagon, and President Trump this weekend declared that Venezuela's airspace will be considered closed to all airlines, further signaling that the United States could be inching closer to launching strikes against Venezuela. Ube Shah-Banda, A News, Washington, D.C.
Well, joining me now to discuss this further is A News' Andy Mioch. Andy, good to see you in the studio. Interesting this, isn't it? How did Washington's decision to label this group, the Cartel de los Soles, a terrorist organization, how did that shift the tone between US and Venezuela?
Well, basically, U.S. designated the Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization in mid-November. The decision took effect on the 24th. Now, Washington alleges that Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro is the head of this cartel, which Maduro, of course, denies, which in essence means they designated Maduro as a terrorist. The Cartel de los Soles was already sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department, but this, let's call it an escalation, and this new list that it's on allows the U.S. government to have a stronger crackdown on what it says is drug trafficking. Washington claims that the cartel led by Maduro also includes members of his inner circle, among them military officers. The U.S., however, hasn't made public any potential evidence they might have that Maduro is directly involved in drug trafficking, but its characterization of Venezuela's president in this way clears the way for a possible targeting of Maduro or his close allies in the military campaign that Washington has launched against what it says is alleged drug trafficking. The Venezuelan military at the time the news broke on the designation said, no, we deny these allegations. This is just a lie to justify an illegal intervention in our country. Just for some context, the Cartel de los Soles, that's a term used by the U.S. to describe a group that engages mainly in drug trafficking, but other illegal activities as well in Venezuela. The term itself was coined in the 90s when generals and division commanders in Venezuela were under investigation over drug trafficking, and the name comes from the sun insignia on their uniforms. According to Inside Crime think tank, this cartel is not one of those traditional cartels. It's a loose network of cells within the Navy, Army, Air Force, and the National Guard, spanning from the lowest to the highest ranks. They say it differs obviously from traditional cartels because it does not have a formal structure. This move by the State Department to designate this cartel as a foreign terrorist organization, of course, comes amid the campaign of airstrikes the U.S. has been engaged in since September off the coast of Venezuela and Colombia. We've heard it in the opening packages. In at least 21 airstrikes, the U.S. has killed more than 80 people. Of course, there's the massive military buildup right now in the Caribbean, and that's the largest in decades we're witnessing right now.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that Secretary Hegseth has said a number of times that when you read the intelligence reports, it's very clear what's going on. The difficulty is, of course, that we can't read those intelligence reports, so I guess we just have to take his word for it or not, depending on how we view it. You mentioned the massive build-up across the Caribbean there, Andy. What is the stated mission, the official reason given by the US for that build-up, and how is it being received, not just in Venezuela, but regionally?
Well, the buildup began back in August with the deployment of naval and air forces, including a nuclear-powered submarine and spy planes. From then on to now, we have dozens of aircraft carriers, including the largest warship in the world, the USS Gerald Ford. There are amphibious assault ships deployed there capable of landing thousands of troops. Of course, there are those strikes we mentioned. Now, the Trump administration has justified those strikes as necessary to stem the flow of narcotics from South America. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that the campaign, officially named Operation Southern Spear, is aimed at, quote, removing narco-terrorists from our hemisphere and securing the U.S. from the drugs that are killing its people. Now, when it comes to the region, Maduro has lost two of his allies in the region, in the St. Vincent and Grenadines and Honduras, where his allies have lost or are on track to lose elections held last week. Some of those votes are still being counted. Now, they lost to right-leaning candidates, but even when it comes to the governments led by left-wing leaders or center-left leaders, such as Brazil, Chile, and Mexico, all those countries have limited their ties with Maduro's government ever since the disputed 2024 election. We can remember that Washington does not recognize Maduro's election, when neither does Brussels nor a host of other Western countries. When it comes to the region, on the other side of the story, there's Colombia's president, Gustavo Petro, who has said that Trump's pressure campaign on Venezuela is more about accessing the country's vast natural resources, including oil, rather than fighting alleged drug trafficking. Petro has been at odds with Trump since he returned to the White House. He has harshly criticized his immigration policy, his ties with Israel, and the military activity of the United States around South America. Elsewhere in the region, the Dominican Republic has announced that a deal reached with the U.S. Defense Department will allow American personnel access to restricted parts of 2 airports in the Caribbean nation until April of next year. Panama, that has its own experience with American invasions, looking back to 1989, denied last month that U.S. military exercises held on its soil this year are in any way a hostile act towards Venezuela. When it comes to U.S. Assets in the region, they have military bases in Puerto Rico, Honduras, and Cuba, while in El Salvador, Aruba, and Curacao, it maintains so-called cooperative security locations, basically surveillance hubs at local airports.
Yeah, very interesting. Andy, when this conflict first began, there was, I think, some ambiguity about whether the Trump administration were explicitly advocating regime change. Ambiguity no longer, it seems, because President Trump has issued a deadline for Maduro to stand down. How is the government in Caracas framing a response to that very direct ultimatum?
Well, the only official thing that we've heard from the U.S. side is that Trump said that he had a conversation with Maduro and that it didn't go well or badly. Of course, the reports surfaced. We heard our Ube talking about these details. Maduro reportedly requested a safe passage for himself alongside his family members with a full legal amnesty, removal of U.S. sanctions as for him and his family, and around 100 Venezuelan officials. Reportedly, Trump denied most of those requests and told Maduro he had a week to leave Venezuela. Now, that deadline has passed on Friday. And on Saturday, we heard U.S. President Donald Trump, rather we read in one of his social media posts that Trump is saying that Venezuelan airspace is now closed in its entirety. The Miami Herald reported there has been no further communication despite Maduro's efforts to hold another call after this remark by Trump on the airspace. When it comes to Venezuela's response, just yesterday, we saw a major rally in Caracas where in front of thousands of people, Maduro pledged what he said is absolute loyalty to his people. In a speech, he said that his country wants peace, but only a peace with sovereignty, equality, and freedom. He went on to say, and I quote here, "We do not want a slave's peace nor the peace of colonies." At the same time, as we've heard, Washington gathered his national security team in the White House to discuss next steps on Venezuela.
Andy, Venezuela once, of course, was an enormously wealthy country. In more recent times, we've seen factors like a lack of tourism really impact the economy very harshly. We've now seen that Caracas has revoked more flight permissions for several major airlines. That's not going to help economically, is it?
Well, it certainly is not going to help. I got to tell you, prepping for this show just a bit earlier, I went on Flight Radar 24, and I've seen less than 10 flights being tracked over the entire Venezuelan territory. Now, this came about just before Trump declared Venezuela's airspace as entirely closed. The U.S. Federal Aviation Authority issued a warning to airlines of increased military activity in the region. Following that, some carriers suspended flights. Caracas then said to these international airlines, look, if you do not return all these flights on their normal schedule within 48 hours, you might lose your license to fly to the country altogether. And now that deadline passed, and on Wednesday night, Venezuelan Civil Aviation Authority revoked 6 licenses to, let me get this right, Spain's Iberia, Portugal's TAP, Colombia's Avianca, Chile's and Brazil's LATAM, Brazil's GOL, and Turkish Airlines. Now, some of these airlines have responded. Iberia had said it plans to restart the flights to Venezuela as soon as the safety conditions are met. Avianca said it intends to reschedule the canceled flights to Caracas by December 5th. Now, when it comes to these other carriers, Panama's Copa and its low-cost airline Wingo are continuing to operate, as well as the domestic airlines with the flag carrier Conviasa. Now, while these civilian flights are halted, and you can imagine what kind of an impact that might have on any plans of a family trip in this upcoming holiday season, another type of flight has been given a green light just today. Venezuela approved a migrant repatriation flight from the United States. Now, these flights have been going on for quite some time 2 times a week, but since Trump's remarks on Venezuela's airspace, they have been stopped.
Very interesting indeed. Finally, Andy, there are many analysts who have pointed to the whole reason that Venezuela for a long time was one of the world's wealthiest countries was, of course, its natural resources. And there are many analysts who have pointed to the fact that this probably is not a fact lost on President Donald Trump. To what extent do you think the potential for the energy sector in the country is something that is part of his thinking?
Well, Venezuela certainly thinks that's the main driver behind Trump's pressure, as does the Colombian president we mentioned just a bit earlier. Over the weekend, Nicolas Maduro wrote a letter to the OPEC, the organization of, of petroleum exporting countries, accusing Washington of trying to seize the country's oil reserve using lethal military force. The U.S. State Department has denied that oil was the main driver in America's military, sending more than a dozen warships and 15,000 troops to the region, or that oil is behind Trump's warnings that land strikes could be imminent. Washington maintains that it's all part of an effort to stem the flow of drugs and illegal immigrants. Whatever the case may be, Venezuela, according to American estimates, is sitting on about a fifth of the world's reserve of crude. Now that's some 300 billion barrels.
Incredible, incredible. Andy, it's a fascinating story. We thank you, as always, for coming in and staying on top of it. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we cross over to our correspondents reporting from all around the world, especially in this region. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Prime Time. Now, in our next segment, we'll cross to some of our correspondents around the world, and especially in this region. But first, let's go to Europe, where some of the European Union member countries are making moves to improve their security and defences. Our correspondent Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where leaders in Berlin and Brussels try to tighten Europe's security posture, from German-Polish defense talks to NATO and EU meetings on Ukraine and Russia. In Berlin, Poland's Prime Minister and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz signaled plans to draft a new defense agreement by 2026 and reaffirmed that the two countries will remain united in backing Ukraine and pushing for the use of frozen Russian assets to fund Kyiv's reconstruction. Donald Tusk welcomed what he called a reset in relations, but urged Berlin to hurry up on promised financial support for surviving Polish victims of Nazi occupation. Tusk pointed out that the number of surviving victims of German Nazi occupation of his country is steadily declining. Despite lingering disputes over historical compensation, both sides presented themselves as indispensable partners determined to deepen cooperation on air defense, migration, and cross-border infrastructure. In Brussels, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte met Ukraine's Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal to discuss how to strengthen Ukraine's air defenses ahead of winter. Kyiv stressed an urgent need for more Patriot and other air defense systems, interceptor missiles, and ammunition to counter Russian missile and drone attacks on cities and critical infrastructure. After the meeting, Rutte posted on the X social media platform that NATO's commitment to, quote, support Ukraine is unwavering. Meanwhile, as Russian strikes intensify, the EU defense ministers' meeting in Brussels opened with a fresh Dutch pledge of 250 million euros to buy U.S. air defense systems and F-16 munitions for Ukraine under NATO's Pearl scheme. The ministers reviewed plans to boost European air and drone defenses, improve military mobility across the continent, and coordinate big-ticket investments that no single member state can afford alone. With over 187 billion euros already committed to Ukraine by the EU and its members, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said, quote, the logic is very simple. The stronger Ukraine is on the battlefield, the stronger they are behind the negotiation table. EU leaders will meet again in Brussels later this month. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now to Tehran, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has launched a 5-day joint anti-terrorism exercise in Iran's northwest province of East Azerbaijan, under the command of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. Our Touraj Shiralilo has more.
Iran's northwest Shabestar County in East Azerbaijan province is hosting the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Sahand 2025 anti-terrorism drills, which run through Thursday. Brigadier General Vali Ma'dani officially launched the exercise on Tuesday, saying it aims to strengthen coordination among SCO members in counter-terrorism operations. The IRGC's Ground Forces Operation Deputy said that SCO member states Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Russia, Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, China, Kazakhstan, Iran, India, and Belarus are participating in the drills, and that representatives of neighboring countries are participating as guest observers. Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibabadi said hosting the exercise reflects Iran's efforts to contribute to a new regional security framework. He noted that Iran's long experience in combating terrorism can help harmonize practices among SCO members. Iran became a full member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in 2023, which is a Eurasian political, economic, and international security body of 10 member states. As a regional organization, it focuses on political, economic, security, and counterterrorism operation. Touraj Shiralilo, Tehran, A News.
Tajikistan is in the international spotlight following recent attacks on Chinese citizens along its border with Afghanistan. President Rahmon has condemned the killings, and Afghanistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs under the Taliban government has also denounced the attacks. A News' correspondent in Central Asia has the details.
Tensions are rising in Tajikistan after 5 Chinese citizens were killed along the border with Afghanistan. These 2 incidents happened within a single week and sent a serious signal to Dushanbe. President Emomali Rahmon has publicly called on security forces to immediately strengthen border control. Heads of security and law enforcement agencies have also been instructed to take effective measures to prevent similar incidents. Tajik authorities say the attacks were illegal and provocative actions from the Afghan side. The first incident took place on the night of November 26, when unknown attackers from Afghanistan struck a gold mining facility in the Shamsuddin Shuhin area. 3 Chinese workers were killed and another was seriously injured. And 4 days later, a second attack occurred in the Darvaz district in eastern Tajikistan, killing 2 Chinese road construction workers. Chinese authorities have urged the citizens to leave border areas and take maximum safety measures. Tajikistan and Afghanistan share a long border of over 1,300 kilometers, and most of it runs along rivers, while about 190 kilometers is land. And Tajikistan borders 4 northeastern Afghan provinces. This area has long been considered high risk. Against this backdrop, Dushanbe in Beijing now face a difficult challenge, protecting foreign investment and citizens while avoiding an escalation of tensions in one of Central Asia's most unstable regions. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
And we'll end this section in Kabul, as talks between Afghanistan and Pakistan have once again ended without progress. The latest round held in Saudi Arabia's capital, Riyadh, wrapped up with both sides sticking firmly to their long-held positions. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more details from Kabul.
Reports emerging from Pakistani media suggest that recent talks between Afghanistan and Pakistan in Riyadh have ended without any breakthrough. The negotiations held behind closed doors in the Saudi capital reportedly saw both sides remain entrenched in their long-standing positions, with little willingness to compromise. However, it's important to note that neither Pakistan nor Afghanistan has officially confirmed or denied that these talks took place, adding another layer of uncertainty to the diplomatic picture. This comes after earlier efforts mediated by Qatar and Turkey also failed to produce results. Prior discussions in Istanbul ended in a similar deadlock, with Afghanistan attributing the failure to what it described as Pakistan's unreasonable demands. Tensions between the two neighbors have risen sharply in recent months. Pakistan accuses Afghanistan of allowing the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP, to operate from its territory, an allegation Afghanistan firmly denies, stressing that it does not permit any group to use its soil against another country. Meanwhile, regional players including Russia and Iran have indicated they are prepared to step in as mediators, should both sides agree to broader diplomatic engagement. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
After the break, Aina Zabalieva will be showing us all the latest social media posts of the day. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Primetime. Now, Aina Zabalieva is here with the very latest social media posts of the day. Aina, what have you got on the agenda tonight?
Good evening, Guy. We have lots actually. I've gathered all of the top stories from all over social media, and I'm about to let you know what's happening in the social media world. Let's go. So, one of yesterday's top stories covered the devastating high-rise fire in Hong Kong. In response, China has launched a nationwide safety campaign aimed at eliminating fire hazards and preventing similar tragedies in the future.
Beijing has initiated a sweeping nationwide fire safety campaign following the deadly high-rise days in Hong Kong, the city's worst disaster in decades. The fire erupted last week during renovation work on the buildings, which were wrapped in bamboo scaffolding and covered with plastic mesh and flammable insulation materials. In the wake of the incident, a formal notice has been issued by central authorities ordering all provinces, ministries and local governments to identify and rectify fire hazards across public and private facilities, showing a zero-tolerance approach towards safety lapses. The directive emphasizes immediate inspection of residential towers, commercial buildings and camera venues and aging infrastructure, with special attention to block evacuation routes, overloaded electrical systems and malfunctioning fire suppression equipment. Officials have also stressed that the drive targets both unsafe practices and managerial negligence, highlighting ratings view that recent tragedies reflect systemic oversight failures rather than isolated incidents. The campaign is expected to run intensively through the winter period, which is traditionally a higher season for fires, reinforcing the government's push to tighten urban safety governance and prevent similar catastrophes nationwide. Manu Mukhtar, A News, Beijing.
Moving on, Pope Leo concluded his 3-day visit to Lebanon. Over 15,000 people gathered to meet the pontiff at the Martyrs Square in Beirut as he called for peaceful coexistence. More on that right now.
During the Pope's first trip to the country, he visited several holy sites, including the tomb of Saint Charbel, where he prayed for peace in Lebanon and beyond. He also attended an ecumenical and interfaith gathering at Beirut's Martyrs Square, highlighting dialogue and unity among different religions. During his speech there, he expressed hope for peace across the Middle East.
For many years, and especially in recent times, the eyes of the world have been fixed on the Middle East, the cradle of the Abrahamic religions, observing the arduous journey and the unceasing quest for the precious gift of peace. At times, humanity looks at the Middle East with a sense of trepidation and disheartenment in the face of such complex and long-standing conflicts.
Pope Leo met with both Muslim and Christian communities, stressing the importance of peace and coexistence. Describing his visit as a mission of peace, he urged Lebanon's leaders to continue their efforts following last year's devastating conflict between Israel and Iran-backed Hezbollah, as well as ongoing Israeli strikes.
Thanks to the unforgivingly rapid passage of time, it's December 2nd now. 'Tis already the season, ladies and gentlemen. To mark the beginning of holiday festivities, United States First Lady Melania Trump showed off the 2025 White House Christmas decorations. Up next is a true Christmas miracle, albeit a bit of an early one. In 1960s James Bond-style Aston Martin has gone from a scrap heap to a collector's gem worth £1 million. Let's find out who made it happen.
You only live twice, a line you'd expect from a James Bond film. But in the English town of Newport Parnell in Buckinghamshire, one car has quite literally been given a second life. A symbol of power and elegance, one boy in the late 50s and early 60s, John Williams began a passion after receiving a toy one as a present.
My name's John Williams, and as a kid I fell in love with the Aston Martin cars, and I decided at the age of 19 that I was going to have one, and I found one, £900, and I bought it.
But Williams didn't just buy any Aston Martin. He bought a Vantage DB5, better known as the car driven by Britain's most famous spy, Bond, James Bond. Half a century later, Williams, now 71, still has his DB5. But without proper storage or the means to maintain it, the car had had its day, I'm afraid, after decades sitting on the driveway of his modest estate home in Milton Keynes.
Family and responsibilities happened, and I'm afraid it stayed on the driveway for about 40 years in disrepair.
Yeah, the neighbours' kids just come round to play, and they used to bounce on the bonnet and we used to tell them off, and then one was jumping on the roof thinking, does it work? Because he's seen the Bond film and they thought it was going to come up, and one balanced on the exhaust pipe and broke it off, but it was tatty anyway.
Now the owner of a small garage, Williams, with his wife Sue, saved up to have the vehicle restored and put pedal to metal, with John taking any overtime he could get. Aston Martin Works valued the rusting, undrivable DB5 at £500,000. Williams could have sold it for a significant profit, but he was determined to bring it back to showroom condition. Restoration took 4 years, and its estimated value now stands at up to £1 million.
Oh, look at that.
It's a bit of a unicorn. You know, it ticks the box for so many owners. It's a Vantage, which is super rare. It's silver birch, the Bond colour. The story and the provenance of the Williams, the passion, the dedication's gone into restoring the car. It's worth probably up to £1 million to someone that really understands the essence of what this car is all about.
For the Williamses, seeing their once rusted car returned to pristine condition is a symbol of history. And hopefully, as Bond says, the past isn't dead. The pair can now relive their memories all over again.
Oh, that's handy. There's a gap.
Finally, we end with a headline making waves in pop culture. Netflix is defying a last-minute legal push from Sean Diddy Combs, preparing to release a documentary produced by 50 Cent that explores the allegations surrounding the embattled artist. With threats of lawsuits and accusations of stolen footage, the showdown is intensifying. Let's take a closer look.
Netflix is about to release one of its most controversial documentaries yet about Sean Diddy Combs, the music mogul behind Bad Boy Records, who is currently serving a 50-month prison sentence after his 2025 conviction following years of allegations. The 4-part docuseries, Sean Combs, The Reckoning, executive produced by Curtis 50 Cent Jackson and directed by Alexandria Stapleton, arrives on Netflix on December 2nd. The trailer has already racked up millions of views. In an attempt to stop the release, Diddy's lawyers sent Netflix a warning letter hours before the premiere, accusing the platform of potential copyright infringement and even possession of stolen property, saying Combs will not hesitate to take legal action. Combs' team claims the docuseries includes video that was never authorized for release. Netflix denies this, pointing to director Alexandria Stapleton, who says the footage was obtained legally and that her team has the rights to use it. She also says they contacted Combs' legal team multiple times for interviews and comment but never heard back. Diddy's team is calling the documentary a shameful hit piece. They allege that this was orchestrated by 50 Cent, who has history of conflict with Sean Combs. Moreover, Cassie Ventura, Diddy's former girlfriend, who filed a civil lawsuit accusing him of years of abuse and testified against him in a federal sex trafficking trial, reportedly inspired the director Stapleton to make the documentary. It seems, despite legal threats, Sean Combs' The Reckoning will still launch on Netflix at midnight Eastern tonight, making this one of the most explosive releases of the year.
And that's all I've got for you today. Don't forget to check us out at anews.com.tv. I apologize, anews.tv, and all social media platforms that you use. It's ANews TV. That's all. Back to you guys.
Interesting stuff, Ina. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that does bring us to the end of Prime Time tonight. Please do join us again tomorrow evening for more insight, analysis, and perspective. And from the whole team here at A News, thanks for watching.